Everyone. Charles Moscowitz here, and my guest is Dr. Juliette M. Engel. And Dr. Engel is the author of a book called SPARKY, Surviving Sex Magick. Juliette, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Glad to be here.
Okay, let me just quickly give a little biographical information here. And I'm looking at this on, here it is. Juliette M. Engel was born into a family of intelligent operatives and initiated into the CIA's newly established Monarch program in 1955 at the age of 6. Long after leaving Sex Magick, she began the Angel Coalition in Moscow, an underground railroad that rescued and repatriated child sex trafficking survivors for 10 years. Now, Juliette, this is an incredible story. And I want to start by asking you about your parents and what they were thinking when they turned you over at age 6 to this program run by the CIA.
Well, that had to be the greatest question of my life. I have never understood what they were thinking. And at the age of 30, when things started coming back to me, I had no memory of my childhood until much later. And yeah. I think that's part of the program. That's how they keep it secret. But when I was 30 and after my daughter was born, so here I had this imprint of myself looking back at me. It's like, what do I tell her? How do I protect her? So I went to my parents and I did ask them. That's the last I ever saw them. They took off, they bought a trailer, they moved to Mexico, and they didn't speak to me again for many, many, many years until after my mother died. I did talk to my father, but it was pointless. So I know they got money for it. As to the rest of it, I think it might be a multi-generational thing, but they remain a mystery to me.
So your parents, though, did they work for the CIA? Were they part of this Operation Monarch, or did they just simply do this to their baby, to their child? I mean, just because for money or for some other reason?
I think they clearly did work for that organization. I think my mother had been involved in it before I was. My uncle was one of the founders of the National Security Agency. He worked at Arlington Hall. Before that, he was with SOS overseas, and then he was one of the organizers of the link between NSA and GCHQ, and he had constant influence on what was happening to me. My mother and he were talking all the time.
And after this had happened and you were turned over to this, this experiment, basically, your parents still stayed in touch with you and you still were with them, or were you removed from the home? Or
No, I was home. I lived with my parents. I didn't want to live with my parents, but now I realize it was probably a very good thing that I did. And kids that were taken completely away from the home, which included many of my cousins, they fared much worse, and most of them are dead. So no, I lived I can't tell because there were so many drugs involved in all of this, but I can document that I was in each school year, you had to attend 90 days in order to pass to the next grade. And each school year, I was there for 91 days. So it was a very conscious effort to keep me in school for 91 days each year. So
now, when you say kept you in school, we're talking about some kind of special government CIA type school that's above and beyond regular school?
No, that was regular school. So in order to be part of the regular life, I had to attend public school 91 days each year, and the rest of the time I was off in the special programs, going through their experiments and their experimental education, some of which I've got written up in SPARKY.
In your book. That's right.
Yes, what I did here was try to document, as people are becoming more aware of the plight of children in these programs, which are going on today, I wanted to give a victim's perspective, and more than a victim's perspective, a survivor's perspective, how you go through something like this, how you survive, how it impacts your life, how it impacts people around you. And so I focused on 1 year of my life. I took the age of 10, and Sparky was the made-up character that I lived under during that year. And I do describe in detail the experiences. It was too painful to remember the whole thing, but I focused on 1 year. So I do go into the details of what it's like to be a child in the Saturnalia where other children are being sacrificed, and how I survived that. And I think clearly these things are going on right now. So people need to know about this, and people need to hear from a child. And as an adult, I can go back and tell this as a child, because, a child couldn't tell this.
No, and also I'd like to note to my listeners and viewers that you have a long and very credible resume that includes, a medical doctor, practicing physician. You've written peer-reviewed articles in medical journals. You've written books. You're a well-respected, person. So you've got the kind of creds that can really tell this story. And also the issue of Operation Monarch. I think that more and more information has been declassified as time has gone on with regard to CIA programs that took place after World War II in particular, such as Operation Monarch, MK Ultra. You had, the butterfly program, whatever they were giving LSD, that people like Timothy Leary and Dr. Jolyon West out in Los Angeles were connected to the CIA, and they were giving out tabs of LSD, people on the street. I mean, there was this whole, massive national experiment with human beings as used as guinea pigs to see how they can alter human nature. I mean, it wasn't just in the United States either. Obviously, the Soviet Union was doing it. Canada was doing it. Britain was doing it, the Tavistock Institute. I mean, this is a huge story of a whole operation, this kind of pseudoscience. It's kind of a outcropping of eugenics, really, where people are being altered. It's a very, very, ugly story that gets into a whole range of questions philosophically, politically. But we're talking about your experience here, Juliette. So what happened while you were basically living a double life as a child? On the one hand, you were going to school and, you were seen as living in a normal situation. On the other hand, you would be shipped off to this CIA-run program where you would have your personality was shattered into many pieces, and you had memory manipulation and mind control. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the trauma started right out when I was 3, when and it's covered in Sparky, when I had to witness my mother being raped, and they was threatening to kill my baby brother. And that was the beginning of the forgetting. They teach you to forget. You have to forget. If you're going to survive, you have to forget.
And that was by your father or by somebody else?
No, that was by a person from who I saw throughout the years, who I know fairly recently died, but he was somehow in charge of the children in my program. And no one ever explained anything to me. It's not like anyone said, this is the program you're in, you're part of this. I
understand. You're 5 years old. I mean, and also, did your parents consent to that? I mean, having some man come in and rape your mother, I mean, is that something that was part of the program, or?
Well, 3 years later, then that same person raped me in front of my father and took money for it. Made it very clear that I saw my father being paid. And after that, I'd lost faith in my mother, and I would never again trust my father. So
of course,
there's separation. So
and for good reason.
Several of my cousins were actually taken out of their families and raised by strangers. I was raised in my family, and well, more or less, I ran away when I was 17. But the first thing they do is cut off your relationship with your parents. So we moved constantly because the ruse only worked for a short amount of time. I mean, I'd show up at school all beat up and chronically anemic. I'm not sure what that's from, whether it was malnutrition or I was losing blood or whatever it was, but I was always anemic. And the school would start sending social workers. They'd start having doctors examine me. So the school district always stepped in. And as soon as that happened, my parents moved to another state and we started all over again. When I got to California was very, at the time, I really attribute my survival to the, I don't call it the welfare state, but the child welfare state of California. They really took an interest in what was happening to me, and they got records from other states, and they really stepped in and tried to do things. And then my parents took me off to Canada. So this was a coordinated effort, and I never totally understood what they wanted from me. I think I understand it now, but I certainly didn't then.
Of course not. You were a teenager at that point. And so at 17 years old, you ran away. What happened then?
Well, I ran away. I was actually at Murphy Hot Springs, which is outside of Big Sur, Monterey area, out in this barn-like thing where they were having there was a big tie into the music industry. So
there was a big rock festival at that time, right?
Well, that was more of they had private parties out there for record execs, and they made it very clear that this was all related to Sex Magick. So it was all magic. These were singers like Jim Morrison and John Phillips and his partner when they formed the Journeymen, and people from Loving Spoonful. I mean, they were all singing there. I didn't really know them. I was the pretty girl in the background with lots of hair and a tambourine.
Right. And were you like being sexually abused at that time by people?
I'm sure, yes. But
was the Manson family involved in this at all or not?
No, that was before the Manson family.
Okay.
But Chuck Manson was there. He was always there. He was sort of a AV guy. He was like the guy who carried the instruments. He played a little drum.
Right. He was an aspiring musician, exactly. And I think he got Brian Wilson, or not Brian, but Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys for a while to take him up and let him live in his house, where the Beach Boys produced a single for him, actually.
Yeah, he but this was before all of that, long before, but several years before the murders and the Manson family and all that. You would never look at this guy. And I mean, he's the amorphous AV guy. And he was usually in prison. And the summer that I got away from Murphy Hot Springs, he was out on a work release program. So he was toting music instruments around. So yeah, I saw him all the time, but didn't
know that he was going to end up doing the kind of crimes. Now,
no. My whole intention was looking for a way to escape. And the people came in and out by helicopter, so couldn't go that way. The Murphy Hot Springs that time, now it's some kind of big new age club or something. But then it was just a hot springs and a barn and cornfields that sort of dropped off into the ocean. I think they were cornfields, there were artichokes growing out there. And I got away when my handler came in so high on whatever he was high on and wrecked his car. And I got out. I took his car, but I had to keep him in it because I couldn't get him out, and escaped that way. And of course, it wasn't that simple, but I planned on getting myself up to the University of Washington, and I did. And the only reason I could survive up there was I found all the green stamps in his car. And he'd been selling LSD in Monterey, and I found his money. So
then you get to the University of Washington, where you eventually attend college and you get a medical degree.
Yep.
And it was an incredible success story, given what you went through. But all this time, you didn't really remember who you were because you felt that your name was Sparky McGregor, which I think was one of your personalities. Part of the programming from Operation Monarch was to give you like programmed several personalities. It's kind of like the novel Sybil, which I think is a semi-true story as well.
I think actually watching the movie Sybil triggered a lot in me. I hadn't remembered anything, but I watched the film and didn't relate to that exactly. But when she's walking around saying, "How could they do that to me? How could they do that to me?" and she doesn't understand what they've done to her, I started walking around going, "How could they do that to me? How could?" And then I'm like, so I did start asking my parents around that time, and that's about the time they left. But the Sparky McGregor's an identity I left behind when I left. My family was living on the Mexican border when I was 10, and we were the apartment that was closest to Tijuana as you could get. So we were as close to Mexico as any American could be. And so a lot of things happened there on the border. And I think my father was down there observing the border. And Sparky was the character that I became for that year, which was a terrible year, but honestly, it was the best year I had. So
it seems like every year, you, as you say, you had a different identity and you'd forget the other identities.
Yeah, yes. So when I was in college, I used my real name. And later I did confirm that was my real name. I had to go back to Illinois and get my birth certificate and find out what my birthday really was. And I did that. I hired a private detective to find out who I was and confirm that my name is my name and my parents are my
which is Juliette Engel, and your parents were named Engel.
No.
Oh.
That's my married name.
That's your married name. Okay, so then you got married, had children, you've been a big success, and you've overcome this. Now, Juliette, you are saying that there are a lot of other people who were abused in this manner and are still being abused by this sort of what has been euphemistically called the deep state. I mean, you call it a lot of names, but we're talking about the CIA operation. I think it was Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy professor Michael Glennon wrote a very good book on this topic. I interviewed him a while back called Double Government. We get into the politics of this and how in 1948, when President Truman established the national security state with all of its branches, there was a lot of concern around that time. In fact, Secretary of the Navy Forrestal opposed it, and he ended up dying under very mysterious circumstances. I get into that in my book, Assassination in America, the speculation. But the point I'm making here is that this so-called security state has morphed into this huge semi-underground state, which has its own black ops, its own means of income outside of Congress, where all over the world, and which interconnects with secret services all over the world, including the British and the Interpol and the Mossad and all these other secret services, and they form this kind of interconnected deep state that has its tentacles in just about every aspect of our life. So, again, I refer to Michael Glennon here. He's a professor at Tufts. He's a very well-respected person. He was a chief counsel of the U.S. Senate under Obama. This is an establishment guy who wrote this. And this same state is what was doing these really, really ugly human experiments after World War II, including the introduction of LSD on the street by people, as I said, like Jolyon West and Timothy Leary, and kind of mass manipulation and the changing of society, the development of the medical state, if you will. Your contention is that it's still going on. How many people are still out there? I mean, this is a crime against humanity, obviously. What can you tell us about what's happening with this now?
I only know what I, research, what I hear from people like you, but I do know that during the course of the time that I was in the program, and what I've seen from being overseas, I lived in Russia for nearly 20 years, and looking back on what's happening in the United States, I think that probably most of the children that were inducted into these programs died. I think there was a lot of child sacrifice going on. I've been to blood rituals. I've had a child sacrificed in front of me and had her blood smeared on my head which was one of the worst things that ever happened to me in my life. It was going on. That would be in 1959, 1960. I doubt if anything has changed. Then the number of they had what was called the Freedom Train. So as you move through this program as a teenager, when they got tired of you, or they didn't want you anymore, or you weren't useful to them, you'd ride the Freedom Train, and that was just that's how you got people drug overdosing, and because you die of drugs, you jump out of the Freedom Train, and a lot of people were doing that, and I refused to do that, and I don't know why I lived through this and other people didn't. I had a lot of talent, brains, and that's the other thing I want to say is that there are a lot of people like me, and some of them have started coming forward since I've written Sparky and put it out there.
Good.
Because, it took a lot of guts to put Sparky out there.
Yes, it did.
I didn't have to do this. I could have stayed hugely successful, top of my game, if I played along. But I can't do that. I can't lie about this. And so Sparky went out there, and other people have come forward, people in very high positions that you would know, and they're talking to me and wondering how.
No, you're a classic definition of a whistleblower, and you're doing it very publicly, and it's very courageous of you. And I think that we all owe a great debt of gratitude for you for your doing this. Now, do you think that? Yeah.
You have to speak up for the victims, and these little kids. I mean, as smart as I am, and as a child, I couldn't speak up. I tried, and no one believed me. And so what a child can do is either learn to forget or just completely lose it and die. And no, we can't. What kind of people are we to let this happen?
No, and I think the problem is probably, this program, as it were, is probably even bigger than you or I could even know, because we're talking about a secret program here that might have international connections. Now, do you think there's any connection between this Operation Monarch and this turning children into like sex slaves, basically, and sex trafficking, and the Bohemian Grove in California?
I don't know about Bohemian Grove. I was never there. But as to children being brought into this program and turned into sex slaves and then sacrificed or whatever else they want to do because they're helpless.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's happening. For sure it's happening.
And what about the Franklin cover-up? Do you know about that with Larry King, the talk show host? It's an interesting, I interviewed the author of that book a while ago. I should have him back. I don't know if he's still doing anything, but that was a case where children were being abducted around the country and they were being used basically as sex slaves by, in this case, kind of a Republican establishment. And there was this whole underground of both male and female sex slaves. And I think also, is there a tie-in with Jeffrey Epstein and his, his Lolita Island, where he had underage women there and people all over the world being jet-setted in, including the Clintons and, Prince Andrew of England and a lot of other big-name people.
I met Jeffrey Epstein must have been 1988, and I was up in the San Juan Islands at a very famous author's house, and she had a little gathering, and all these operatives, these young hot guys with their leather jackets, came flying in on their own planes. These were the Iran-Contra pilots, and Jeffrey Epstein was one of them. And he spoke to me. He wanted, at that time, I was running an ultrasound lab at a hospital in Seattle, and doing a lot of very cutting-edge research on ultrasonography. And he wanted to hire me to go. He explained that they were starting this island resort, and it would be for heads of state and very important people. And could I hide communications in medical transmissions? And I said, sure, yeah, you could do that. And he wanted to hire me to do that. And he wanted to give me this beautiful house in on San Juan Island, and but I would have to have left my children. You know, that was the deal. It was a crazy thing. I wanted no part of it, and had no further communication. But I did meet him back in 1988, and that's when they were obviously starting this plan. And yeah, they didn't talk about child trafficking to me. That would have been a game ender right there, and I wanted nothing to do with it. But clearly, that was their plan. That's what they were starting to do. And
why did they contact you, Juliette? Well, what made?
Think because I was on the cutting edge of ultrasound digital technology, and I'd written papers on it and presentations. I had patents, and they wanted me to work for them.
But they didn't know your past.
I wonder if they did.
Oh, who knows?
I think probably they did.
Okay.
Because I think that the people that got sucked into this, you know, he had physicians working for him at the ranch in New Mexico. He had physicians working for him on that island. I think that they probably have operations like this on multiple islands, and I think
around the world.
Yeah, and I think what he was approaching me for was to set that up in I don't know if you know the San Juan Islands, but they're beautiful islands up between Canada and Washington State. And they're fairly remote and very, you know.
Good place to do some funny business. And also there's apparently this island off the coast of Italy that was part of this. Jeffrey Epstein also was very connected to this, to the more local to me, the MIT Media Lab, and this head of it, which basically had to resign because he accepted a lot of money from Jeffrey Epstein and didn't declare as such. But the reason Jeffrey Epstein was giving money to the Media Lab at MIT was because he was promoting this idea of transhumanism. And this professor who had to resign, his name escapes me right now, I should have looked it up, but he's written papers on transhumanism that you can look up. And so it's still I think it's still on the MIT website. I did this research a while back. And this whole idea is to create it's kind of a new eugenics. It's sort of a new form of Darwinianism. They want to create a new man by perfecting the human being through computer components and this stuff. It's very Orwellian, and it's very troubling. I wonder how much that is connected to this whole CIA operation that goes back to what you were doing with Operation Monarch back in the 40s.
Very much. When I was in high school, for 2 years, I went to Palo Alto High School, which is right across the street from Stanford University, and just a couple blocks from the Hoover Institution, which is the big library there. And I would go over there for classes. This would be my programming classes.
Programming.
Through Stanford Research Institute, and I spent a lot of time there. And one of the things they were sort of teaching was the combination of humans and computers. And at the time, nobody had heard of a computer. They were still called Turing machines. But that was the goal. It was cybernetics. Cybernetics being humans becoming part machine. So the computer is integrated into the human being, or the human being is integrated into the computer. And yes, it's very much part of that. And that's exactly what Epstein alluded to, was like using the electronics to
All right. I seem to be having a little bit of a computer freeze here. Maybe maybe somebody has tampered with it. I don't know. Let's see what happens. No?